Have you ever felt that something inside you is slowly dying, and yet still insists on staying alive? Why do we keep repeating the same stories with different characters? What if the real enemy isn't the world, but the you never had the courage to abandon?
Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung whispers this like someone who knows what you're trying to forget, that there's a part of you creating everything you swear you hate. This isn't a conversation about self-improvement. This is a funeral. We're here to bury your old self, but not with flowers, with truth, with psychic blood, with the courage to face what has been trying to rise from the shadows for years. You can feel it now, even without words, that something is wrong, that even when everything seems fine, something rots inside. You can move to another house, change jobs, end a relationship, but the feeling of acting out your own life stays, like a specter waiting in the dark. Carl Jung understood something we're terrified to admit. You can live an entire life without ever meeting yourself, without ever touching your essence, without ever letting your true self be born. That's why he created a process, a psychic rite of passage. He called it individuation. But the name doesn't matter now. What matters is that this process demands death, symbolic, profound, intimate, of the false self you built to survive. We're not talking about a gentle, gradual transformation. We're talking about a rupture, a reverse birth, where what is born is what you buried. And what did you bury? The anger they called ugly. The ambition they said was selfish. The tenderness that made you seem weak. The madness you locked away to be accepted. You don't change by adding new versions of yourself. You change by digging up what was already there, hidden, in the dark, waiting. The next 6 months are not a promise, they're a sacrifice, because for the new self to be born, the old one must die. And your old self is clever. It will resist. It will create drama, distractions, relapses. It will convince you that change is dangerous, that it's not worth it. Because it knows, honey, if you cross the point of no return, it dies. But if you endure, if you cross that threshold, you will no longer be a variation of who you once were. You'll be someone you never imagined you could be, not by magic, not by miracle, but because finally you stopped running from yourself. Welcome. This is a journey of self-destruction, so that, for the first time, something true can be born. Now let's move on to chapter 1, but first, breathe, because from here on out, you'll never return the same. You wake up. Another day, the mirror shows the same face, but something behind the eyes no longer fits. You change your haircut, your city, your bed, but the same emptiness finds a way to follow you. And then you think, maybe I just need a new beginning. And you start again, again, and again. But what happens when it's you who needs to end? Carl Jung observed this with surgical precision. People changed the scenery but kept the same script. Different jobs, different partners, even different countries. But the same stories echoed back like a loop. An unconscious pattern operating as destiny. And you can feel it, can't you? That sense of living a recycled version of yourself. You know that person who leaves a toxic relationship only to find someone identical, just with a new name, or the one who changes bosses but ends up humiliated the same way, as if doomed to be the victim? It's not bad luck. It's a pattern. It's your old self reenacting its own death, without ever truly dying. And do you know what the trap is? The ego loves to pretend it's changing while keeping everything exactly the same. You change environments but bring your traumas in the luggage. You start new projects with the same old fears. You try to evolve but carry an inner saboteur that has your voice and your last name. The truth is there's a part of you that doesn't want to change. It's there to protect you, to keep everything safe, even if that safety costs your freedom. That part is terrified of the unknown. And as Jung said, people will do anything, absolutely anything, to avoid facing their own souls. Because facing your soul hurts. It dismantles the image you built of yourself. It forces you to see that much of what you call I is just conditioning. The child who needed to please. The teenager who learned to hide their pain. The adult who became functional, but deeply asleep. That's why the first stage of transformation is the most dangerous. Recognizing the cycle. Looking back without excuses. Realizing that you've been playing the same role all along, only changing the costume. And that realization is devastating, because it strips you of the illusion of external control. But that's where everything begins. It's when you stop blaming the world and start asking the questions that hurt. What within me keeps attracting the same kind of pain? Which part of me feeds off this repeated suffering? And who would I be if I let it go? That's the first step. Stop running. Because as long as you try to improve your life without confronting the hidden architecture of your psyche, nothing truly changes. It's like renovating a crumbling castle without touching the foundation, beautiful on the outside, rotten on the inside. The old self disguises itself as progress. It gives you a false sense of growth just to keep you trapped. And when you're about to change for real, it pulls you back, with fear, with doubt, with well-rehearsed old excuses. But now you know. You begin to see the cycle, to recognize the patterns, to feel the tension between what was and what wants to be born. And maybe, for the first time, you start to realize the problem was never the world. The problem was the mask you wore to survive in it. Have you ever wondered what you've been hiding from yourself? I'm not talking about memories. I'm talking about what you felt, desired, thought, and then deemed unacceptable. What you buried alive just to keep belonging. That's what Jung called the shadow. But here's a warning. The shadow isn't what's wrong with you. It's what's incomplete. It's made of the parts you silenced to be loved, of the impulses you had to deny to appear civilized, of the scream you drowned behind a polite smile. And the cruelest part? It keeps acting. Behind every rite gesture, every explosive reaction, every irrational fear, there's a piece of your shadow trying to emerge. The shadow is like an animal locked in the basement. You can pretend it doesn't exist, but it scratches at the walls of your life from the inside out. That's why Jung said, "What you resist persists." And resistance to the shadow is exactly what strengthens it. You see it in others, but never in yourself. That's why certain people irritate you so much. They carry the traits you can't stand to acknowledge in yourself. The selfish person who infuriates you might be revealing your own inability to say no. The dramatic one who exhausts you may be performing the pain you pretend not to feel. The arrogant one you despise might be your repressed confidence begging to be lived. These are triggers, and they are portals. For 2 months, Jung proposed a radical exercise. Observe everything that affects you deeply, admiration or disgust, and take note, because within those reactions lives your shadow. Yes, it takes courage, because you may discover that what hurts you most in others is exactly what you won't allow in yourself. But it's not just about embracing your ugly side. There's also what Jung called the golden shadow, those qualities you projected onto idols, mentors, artists, leaders, the courage you see in others but don't believe you have, the creativity you admire but suffocated to seem grown up, the freedom you watch from afar but are afraid to touch. All of that is you. You just exiled it. And now the goal isn't to fight those parts, not to destroy them, but to talk to them. Jung developed a technique called active imagination. It's almost like a conscious dream. You sit down, close your eyes, and invite that part you reject to appear. It might come as an image, a character, a sensation, and you ask, "What do you want to show me? Why do you exist? What did I lose when I hid you away?" Yes, it sounds strange, but wait until you try it, because those parts do speak, and what they say changes everything. One of Jung's patients, for example, couldn't say no. Always kind, always available, always exhausted. When he dialogued with his shadow, he found a wild, rough figure. It scared him, but over time he understood. It wasn't evil. It was self-protection. It was the no he had never learned to say. And when he allowed that part to emerge, he didn't turn into a monster. He became someone with boundaries. That's the secret of the shadow. It doesn't want to control you. It wants to come home, but it only returns when you recognize it. So ask yourself, what part of me have I been avoiding? What do I hide even from myself? What qualities did I bury just to fit in? Be honest. Because as long as your shadow remains invisible, it will drag you through the same old stories. But when you finally see it, you regain energy, strength, truth. It's like finding an ancient map of your own being, tearing it apart and rewriting it in living ink. In the coming months, that shadow will stop being a hidden monster, and it will start becoming an ally. But for that to happen, you must let it speak. And more than that, you must let the ego fall silent. There is a silent moment in the process of transformation when everything seems to stop. It's as if you're standing in the middle of the desert of your own psyche. No signs, no way back, no guarantees. This is where the old self begins to die. Not with explosions, but with a slow and painfully lucid emptiness. It is the death of the ego. And no, we're not talking about destroying your sense of identity. We're talking about letting die everything you thought you were. but never truly were. The masks, the roles, the personas you created to please, to protect yourself, to fit in. Jung called this moment the transcendent function, the instant when the old and the new collide within you. The old self doesn't want to leave, but the new one no longer fits where you used to be. It's an inner birth. But unlike ordinary births, here the one being born is you, and the one dying is also you. This phase is marked by unbearable tension. You still react like the person you've always been, but deep down you can already feel that something in you has changed. You can no longer laugh at the same jokes, tolerate the same humiliations, or ignore the same pain. And that's frightening, because if the old self dies, you lose your references. Who are you without the role of the victim? Without the disguise of strength? Without the addiction to pleasing others? The ego screams. It wants to pull you back to what's familiar, even if it means suffering. It will create crises, distractions, self-sabotage. It will make you question your own sanity. But that's a good sign. It means the ego is weakening. One of Jung's patients once described this stage as living between worlds. She was no longer the submissive woman she once was, but she still didn't know how to be whole. Every decision felt like a battle. Every conversation felt like a farewell to herself. And yes, that's exactly what it is. You are saying goodbye to an identity that worked for years but has now become a prison. You are standing at the threshold between the known and the possible, and that is the closest a person can consciously come to madness. This is where many people give up. They run back to their comfort zones, cling to dysfunctional relationships, old addictions, empty routines, anything to avoid facing the void of being no one for a while. But if you can endure that void, if you resist the temptation to return to the mask, something miraculous happens. Your psyche finds a third way. You stop being what others expected. You stop living as a reflection, and you begin to move from a center you had never inhabited before. You discover that you can exist without performing, that you can act without justifying, that you can simply be, even without knowing exactly what that means. The death of the ego is not an end. It is the opening of an inner space where the self, with a capital S, can finally emerge. And the self does not shout. It doesn't need to convince. It simply is. It manifests through choices that make sense even without logic, through silences that heal more than 1,000 words, through a firmness that doesn't come from anger but from truth. At this point, you may start to notice strange changes. Things that once irritated you no longer make sense. People who used to orbit your drama naturally fade away. Invitations that once felt tempting now sound empty. You didn't force any of it, but everything around you begins to reorganize itself. It's as if the world were responding to your inner metamorphosis, as if life had finally understood who is inhabiting this body now. But be warned, this stage is irreversible. Once you cross this point, the old self never returns, and that is both liberating and terrifying. Because you look back and no longer recognize who you were, but you look ahead and still don't know who you'll become. This is the vacuum of the soul, the threshold between madness and enlightenment. There is a moment in the crossing when silence changes texture. It stops being an emptiness that threatens to swallow you and becomes a full, almost luminous space where something breathes for the first time. This is the moment of the birth of the real self. Not a better self, but a self that could never exist because it was buried beneath layers of roles, masks, and survival. The self, that deep center Jung described, doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes as a whisper, as a silent yes rising from deep within your chest, as a simple gesture that suddenly feels too natural to have been planned. It doesn't demand approval. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply is. One day you wake up and notice that something has changed at a cellular level. That comment that once triggered your anger no longer echoes inside you. That situation that once paralyzed you now feels like a neutral invitation. You act without asking permission from your past. Not because you decided rationally, but because something inside you has reorganized itself. This is not a victory of the ego. It's the dissolution of your inner trenches. Consciousness and the unconscious, once enemies, now cooperate. There is no longer civil war within you. There is a whole organism breathing together, pointing toward a center vaster than any personal narrative. That center isn't grand in the way the world understands. It doesn't make you feel special, superior, or enlightened. Quite the opposite. It makes you feel true, whole, peacefully imperfect. You discover you no longer need to perform, not even for yourself. A man Jung once described it like this: "It was as if I had come home after a lifetime of being a guest." That sentence captures the essence of the birth of the real self. It's not about becoming someone new, it's about finally occupying the place that was always yours. It's about stopping the search for belonging in the outer world and feeling rooted within yourself. This birth has practical, almost mundane consequences. Relationships that were once unsustainable dissolve effortlessly. Jobs once maintained out of fear lose their meaning. But new connections also arise. Coherent opportunities, coincidences that no longer seem like coincidences. Jung called this synchronicity, external reality responding to your inner state. When the self is born, the world around you begins to reorganize itself. It doesn't mean your life becomes perfect or that you'll never face problems again. It means that, for the first time, you're present enough to respond to life from a real place, not from an unconscious script. You're no longer trying to be accepted, no longer trying to prove you're good enough, no longer running from who you were. You are whole, and from that wholeness arises a kind of freedom that doesn't depend on circumstances. This is where people often confuse transformation with enlightenment, but it isn't enlightenment. It's psychic maturity. It's individuation. You are not above the world, but deeply within it, without losing yourself. It's not a spiritual fantasy. It's a serene lucidity that can hold its own pain without collapsing. And this state is stable because it isn't born of effort or performance. It emerges naturally when the old self dies and the self takes its place. As Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But here choice is no longer an act of the ego. It's a choice that happens through you, not against you. The birth of the real self is not a dramatic scene. Sometimes it's an ordinary day, a cup of cold coffee on the table, a breeze coming through the window. But you feel it. Something fundamental has changed. You can no longer pretend to be who you were. It no longer fits. It's like trying to wear children's clothes. They don't fit you, and you can't understand how they ever did. That's how the 6-month journey ends. Not with applause, but with a quiet return to yourself. With the feeling that finally you've stopped walking in circles and started walking in a straight line, even without knowing exactly where it leads. This is the true meaning of destroying your old self. It's not violence, it's birth. It's dying as a character to be born as the author. It's ceasing to exist as a reflection to exist as the source. You don't need the world to validate it, because you have finally become someone who doesn't need to be seen to exist. And it's precisely there, in that calm invisibility, that your life truly begins. Welcome, not to the end of the process, but to the beginning of your real life. Destroying your old self isn't about becoming a better version. It's about ceasing to be what was never true. During these 6 months, you didn't add masks. You removed them. You didn't learn to fix your life. You learned to listen to what had always been screaming in silence. And now something has changed, not outside, but within. You look back and no longer recognize the character who once inhabited your body. And you look ahead, without needing certainties, because there is something new within you, presence. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's exactly what you did. You dove in. You faced it. You resurfaced. The old you won't come looking for you anymore. It already knows it's dead. Now live. For real. If you're hearing this now, it's because you had courage. Courage not just to watch a video but to move through it. To let the words pass, not only through your ears, but through your chest. To recognize that there's something inside you that needs to be born, even if another part has to die for that to happen. And I want to thank you, truly. This script isn't just content. It was written in the middle of the night, after an evening when I myself almost gave up. It was in one of those silent midnights when the soul tightens for no clear reason that I reread a passage from Jung and cried without fully understanding why. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. In that moment, I realized what hurt was everything still trapped inside me, everything I wouldn't let die, and everything that secretly was still begging to be born. So this video is also for that former me, and maybe for this version of you, right now. Now, if you felt something along this journey, leave a comment, even if it's just an "I'm here." Because sometimes all we need is to know we're not alone in this crossing between the self that dies and the self that is born. Subscribe to the channel or don't, but know this, if you disappear now, the algorithm will bury you along with your old self. It's a joke, sort of. And if you still have the breath, there's a video appearing on the screen right now that goes deeper into one of the strangest and most powerful moments of this process. I can't say the name rite, but let's just say it involves a disturbing encounter with your unconscious. Click and see for yourself, or keep running. But know this, the self is waiting, and it has time. I'll see you there, or inside you.